we're not having the right conversations. We're not having the right conversation. Instead, we're now caught up in no TFW or TFW. I'm like, that is not the conversation. Like, that is not the conversation to have. Like, the question is, what is the system? How do we, like, what are we trying to do?
Canada doesn't know what it wants. Why would you identify critical skills that you want? You set up a program to bring them in, and then you sabotage them from succeeding in the country. Because that's actually what we're doing we're looking at the solution of our labor shortage, and we're allowing Canadian society to almost blame them for our social problems instead of putting our arms around them and saying, thank you for filling a critical skills gap. And the silence from the government is deafening right now, because they're sitting back and they're allowing immigrants to be blamed for all of the problems in Canadian society.
Welcome back to the Newcomers Podcast, people, where I explore what it means to be an immigrant with immigrants like myself. Today, I'm talking to Ruairi Spillane, let me say it this way. I think he's the OG of coming to Canada, because he runs a site actually called Moving to Canada, which when I saw the name, I was like, I wish I called the newcomers that, actually. I mean, welcome.
Thanks so much, Dozy. I'm really delighted to be able to chat today.
Yeah, and so today we'll talk a bit about, resumes, interviews, getting a job in Canada, because I feel like one good thing you've done the past couple of years is, just as from moving to Canada, you run a business called Outpost Recruitment, which kind of helps people kind of get jobs in Canada. But I think it's focused on mostly project managers, engineers, right?
Yes, it's very focused on the construction sector. So we basically focus on construction and engineering professionals for infrastructure and building. So that's a very niche business. But then through moving to Canada, we're trying to constantly create scalable resources to help newcomers arrive in Canada prepared to succeed. And that doesn't just mean immigration, right? The employment is probably the bigger puzzle that a lot of newcomers are having right now.
Yeah. Oh, that is it. And I think I want to kick off with the first question, which is, you all have written a lot about Canadianizing resumes. And very often, I think some people, I mean, because I think I fell into that trap too, which is when you land, when they say that to you, what people start thinking about is, oh, I need to kind of format my resume in a particular way, or I need to, put about me up first, or I'll remove where I'm from, and it feels like that is the big conversation around, oh, can you make your resume fit the Canadian market? Is that true? What do you think about that? Like, what does that really even mean? Because I do think, as I've spent more time here, I think it's more than formatting.
Of course, yeah. The format or the layout, how things are put together is just one thing, right? We all say with any document, content is king. If there's amazing content and it's poorly formatted, an employer will see past that, okay. But formatting it in the way that a Canadian hiring manager would expect is very helpful, right? It's a communications exercise, right?
Yeah.
If you're pitching to an investor, you wouldn't pitch how you want to pitch. You would pitch how an investor wants it.
So that's good.
That's a basic lesson in communication, right? Put yourself in the eyes of the receiver.
Yeah.
And that's where I would always recommend a Canadian template, right? How is a Canadian template different from other resume templates? Dare I say just certain things, like maybe putting a professional summary up top. That can read like the cover of a book, right? If you're in a bookshop or you're looking at an audiobook right now, you're kind of like, why should I listen to this book? Why should I invest time in reviewing this resume? So the professional summary is a very high level summary of you, your personality, your skill set, the roles you've held, your industry, your education. And it's just like a condensed micro version of the rest of the resume or the rest of the book. So that's kind of the first thing I recommend. But then simple things like, we always, basically listing, beyond going through your work experience, education typically comes after work experience and stuff like that. So there's minor formatting things, but I prefer to obsess over the content. To me, the content is king. The key thing, I think, when you're looking at content is terminology that you're using. Give you an example, right? I'm not sure how it is in Nigeria, but in Europe, we often say you have a 2-1 or a 2-2 degree.
Yeah,
That
Nigeria
means,
is same. Yeah, it's
yeah,
same too. Yeah.
that means nothing to a Canadian employer. So it's on you. You can say 2-1, 2-2, and you can confuse a hiring manager and make them feel stupid. Or you can convert that to a GPA if you understand your
Oh.
audience, right? So terminology like using high school isn't a term we use in Ireland, but
Yeah.
listing that you went to high school at this area. These are all very simple things, but like the key goal with when you're writing a job description is understand the audience, understand the differences in languages used in your industry, in job titles, your target job title. Actually, that to me, that's the most important part of your resume, because up top, instead of writing professional summary, I encourage people to pick 1 or 2 job titles that you are looking for. That requires research, and it requires you to pick a lane, right? Instead of saying I can do anything, which scares me sometimes, I want people to pick what are the 2 things that I want to do. And if you write your job title as it is in Nigeria or Ireland, they may or may not get it right, depends on the industry and things like that. But figure out what is the job title that my skill set is best suited to in Canada. So starting a resume with a target job title, a professional summary, is the best possible start, because the cliche is that you only have 20 seconds to impress. Why wouldn't you give them a perfect summary that is localized, adapted? And now you're going to get somebody who's saying, oh, I want to spend another 2 or 3 minutes reviewing this resume. And it's going to make it easier for them to understand. And frankly, it's just going to be more favorable to the outcome that you're looking for, right? Because like, I'll give you another example as well. Like, I deal in the construction industry, and like if you're writing the value of a project in Indian rupees or Nigerian nairas, like, sorry, like, no offense, but they don't care. They're not an FX trader, so they don't care to do the conversions. It's your job to give them a resume with Canadian, not USD. I don't know why people present USD values in Canada. That's very offensive almost. So I encourage people, give them Canadian terms, Canadian currencies, Canadian terminology. It's also showing your ability to adapt, which we'll get into later on. But like, it's really a kind of it's really an adaptation. How keen are you to adapt? How well are you going to research things? Another key difference, I guess, between resumes, I'll say global resumes and Canadian resumes, is we don't publish a picture up top. We do not put a date of birth. We do not put a marital status. These are all considered no for basically kind of human rights and kind of ethical reasons, right? So they don't want to allow an employer the opportunity to discriminate based on your marital status, your citizenship, any of these things. You touched on actually with your opening question that you should never write that you're overseas. Of course you should. If you're overseas, you're overseas. Put the location you're in right now. But there's other certain things, like maybe it's recommended if you have a work permit, make it clear that you have. If you have permanent residency, make it clear that you have, right?
Oh, I didn't know that actually.
Well, it's very helpful, right? Because unless the job that you're applying for indicates that sponsorship is a possibility, then to ultimately down on the requirements, there probably is authorization to work in Canada is required. So maybe the first thing you should do is, if you are applying from France, you should make it clear that I have authorization to work, because like job hunting is kind of like bingo, as in sometimes you see the numbers and you don't have any of them, but you apply for the job anyway. That's exhausting. It's such a waste of time, and like sending the same blanket resume out to 50, 100, 200 companies, it's frankly exhausting. And like doing a little bit of research first at the front end and figuring out, is my resume understandable to a Canadian hiring manager? Do I have the right skill sets to apply for this role? Am I qualified? Like it's incredible how much time newcomers waste sending the wrong resume for the wrong role. And frankly, it becomes depressing after a time when you realize that I've applied for 200 jobs and I haven't heard back yet. It doesn't entitle you to get lucky.
Yeah.
The goal is going back to the research and the preparation thing, which will kind of be a theme of today, right? As we kind of go through how to job hunt the wrong way. But that's a very convoluted answer to the resume thing. It's not just format; it's making it understandable to the hiring manager. That requires a little bit of research and planning up front. Maybe talking to people in your industry, looking at suitable roles, doing a gap analysis to see what are my strengths and weaknesses versus a local candidate, which inevitably is what I'm competing against here, right?
Yeah. Like, I mean, like, you've given me a lot to think about. And I think the first one is, you've been an immigrant too. And so you kind of know Canada, you understand how Canada is. And so I'm just wondering, like, for someone who's new also, just that desperation to, like, I need to pay my bills and stuff. I mean, they say come with proof of funds. We do know a lot of people. Some people come with, some people don't. So there's that reality that does exist. So literally, it still means that people are desperate. Even those that come with proof of funds, like, for example, I moved with Maya, and then you just kind of convert. You're looking at the money and you're like, gosh, I need to get a job because I can't afford to go broke. I mean, there are bills to pay. And so when you meet people like that, like, how do you help them see still the need to go through this whole process you just designed? Because to someone who's new, who's desperate, it kind of feels like it's much easier if I just send. I just sit down at my desk and you just send, and I'm hoping that one will bite. Like, it gives us some comfort. Like, we feel like we've done stuff. Like, we feel like we've done something, compared to you spend time doing the research and all that. And then in the end, you probably send out 2 resumes and you're like, I've not done anything. Now, part of that also, does it also help that if you look at the advice that floats around the ether, there's a lot of that thing where there's all, especially in Canada, because I mean, that's where I probably apply for jobs a lot, is, apply to as many jobs as you can.
So I suppose, your question has many different layers there, right? Ultimately, I always remind people is whatever they ask you to have as proof of funds is never enough.
Never.
Everywhere has become hellishly expensive over the last 5 years. It's not a Canada phenomenon. I meet people or I chat to people from Mexico, from Brazil, from all developing countries, and they're all escaping for the same reasons. They're saying the price of everything has gone crazy. And guess what? It's also happening in Canada. So the challenge to me is funds is just one resource. It's a critical resource, but I also encourage people, using up all of your funds is a crisis for sure, right? Not a lot of newcomers have a lot of money, right? Isn't depending on where you're coming from, you're coming for opportunity, right?
Yeah.
And one other thing to kind of note is, newcomers from developing countries have very little choice. This is kind of like they're all in, right? They're obviously leaving their country because, I always say Western immigrants are leaving for a better quality of life, where from developing countries, it's often looking for, yes, it's a better quality of life, but you're just looking for simple survival and opportunity. So the stakes are very, very high. Your financial resources may not be infinite, right? So that's a critical resource to manage. But taking on the second aspect of your question is your time is also a very valuable resource, your energy. So you mentioned in the question, you said is, I hate meeting people when they're desperate. I call them the headless chickens, right? They approach me, they see a post or they find Outpost or Moving to Canada and they go, hey, I've applied for 100 job applications. I've not heard back yet. First thing I do is not diagnose the problem. I try and gather information. I go, what kind of roles are you looking for? Can you share your resume? Then I open their resume and I'm like, oh no, they've literally blown it with the wrong resume. It's not understandable. It's going back to the first question there, is it's not their best work. So why would you try to, or why would you undertake a life-changing adventure by presenting, not your best work to an employer? So that's the problem there. So before you get desperate, I prefer to meet people earlier. So often, 2 months, 6 months before they actually leave, because that gives me a huge opportunity to to influence them in terms of understanding the power to adapt, to actually be able to shape their research and planning, be able to shape their job application documents, whether that's a resume, a cover letter if they need it, being able to help them understand the risks that they need to manage as they go through the process, being able to help them understand the interview questions correctly. All of these resources are open source on Outpost and Moving to Canada, just as a reminder for people, right? Because with Outpost, we provide a kind of concierge service, because as a recruitment agency, my client is ultimately the construction or engineering company in Canada, and they will pay for a solid candidate. So the amazing thing is I get to provide a concierge service to the candidate, and it's entirely free. They just have to be motivated and willing to adapt. But with Moving to Canada, anybody can go through these steps. They just have to have the motivation and the willingness to learn and adapt. So I really urge people to, obviously, if you're here right now and you're desperate, I just encourage people, open your eyes and change things. You can't keep doing things the same way and expect different results. So the first thing I would analyze is, well, are you punching above your weight? Is your job title realistic? Is your salary expectation realistic? Is your resume your best work? Is it focused on results? Does it tell me who you are as a person? Does it tell me what you have achieved in your career versus what you do day to day and month to month, duties, basic duties? But finding people earlier on is the goal for me, because then I can, it's very rewarding looking back on placements through Outpost, because they come here, they get on the right trajectory. First time, they have a job often within 2 weeks of arrival, because I can send out their resume a month before they land. We can allow for a 6-week process. We give them a few weeks to find their feet. They're not unemployed for 3 or 4 months, which is the worst case scenario for a lot of newcomers in Canada, sadly. If they go about things the wrong way and they haven't done their research and planning, that can be a challenge. Sometimes it's perfectly normal, depending on your industry, for it to take 2 to 3 months. So I don't want to judge people based on how long it takes, because sometimes the more ambitious person might set out a stall and they'll say, okay, I'm going to find a survival job. I'm going to work for Uber. I'm going to work for, I'm going to deliver food. I'm just going to find something to bring in the bills because I'm aiming as high as possible. And I know this could take time. So it's really about finding the balance between what is your objective? What are the resources that you have? Can I sustain a job hunt? Can I add more funds by finding a survival job, as they say? And then is ultimately, do I have the flexibility? Does the survival job give me the flexibility to find my dream job? So those are a lot of research and planning decisions that should be made before you enter the country. And you should come into the country with a plan on how long is this going to take? What's my plan B? What am I setting out to do? And then how am I actually going to get there? So that's the whole remit of Outpost and Moving to Canada in a nutshell. It's not just solving immigration. It's helping you arrive in Canada prepared to succeed. And that really means it's not just the settlement aspects of finding a bank account or finding a place to live. The real hard part is finding a job that is I guess that matches your career goals. Sometimes you have to step down a level. Sometimes you can come in at a perfect level, or sometimes you can step up. But it really depends on how practical it is. And that's why it's good to get the advice of, somebody in your diaspora, somebody in your industry, chat to more HR managers and ask them questions. Am I if you get a negative feedback on an interview, say, what can I learn? How would you encourage me? And they might tell you, look, it's not realistic to come in at this level because you need skills X, Y, and Z. And then you can go off and you can take a course in your meantime, or you can, step back a level and then know that you can step up to that in 3-6 months, right? People get obsessed with starting job title and starting resume. The key is starting. If you're motivated, don't let ego get in the way, and be willing to start somewhere, but have that conversation with an employer and say, hey, look, I'm a project manager, but I'll come in as an assistant PM, subject to me learning skills X, Y, and Z. and then just says, is it feasible for me to be a project manager at 6 months if I can show you my ability to meet these expectations? So likewise with salary, everyone gets obsessed with starting salary and go, oh no, I can't take that. I'm earning this in my country. And I'm like, a Canadian employer's job is not to match your salary in country X. Their job is to pay you what you're worth to them. So if you see the bigger picture and you look at salary, starting salary plus benefits, plus the opportunity to grow, and you put a value on that, you will make far better decisions.
You know what I like about how you're putting this is like, it's almost, you can afford to feel like a victim, because I feel like there's this thing about it, but there's also another part of that conversation, which is there's what I call the perfect immigrant, or the people who do the work, but it does feel like a ton of people who don't do the work.
Yeah.
So are you saying to me that you don't help those kind of people at all, or you just ignore?
I try. We're very lucky as a private enterprise, right? As in, if you're dealing as a public agency or a settlement agency, you kind of have to help everybody, okay? But one of the benefits of being a private enterprise is if I don't get the right energy back, I step to the side. I'll often, if I don't think, with moving to Canada, our whole idea is to create scalable resources. If people contact us, sometimes it gives us an idea for a content piece or a gap, but our goal isn't to provide a concierge service. We don't ask for your payment details. We don't want payment. I just want to help people, and I want to see the bigger picture, and our business model allows us to do that, right? But with Outpost, I'll engage with somebody, but frankly, I'm a little bit disappointed. If I've created all of these open source resources on how to master your resume, and I get this, crap resume, I'll highlight it to somebody.
Ruairi, that's not fair.
But it just shows me how motivated this person. But not everybody is a planner. But what I will do is I'll engage with that person if I see potential. That's my job as a recruiter, to identify potential. If I can identify potential in a newcomer or a local candidate, I will have a conversation with them, and I will ask, I'll engage with them. I'll chat about, what are you trying to do here? What are the challenges? What are your expectations? And then I'll often kind of close that call and say, are you open to working on your resume together? If it's rarely a no when you chat to them face to face. If you tell them via email, they'll get offended. Because here's the problem is, everyone has put a lot of work into their resume, rightly or wrongly. It's their best work, or it's the best they know of. So
yes,
all I
exactly.
ask from any candidate that comes to me at Outpost is to be open to improving it. Because here's the challenge. I always bring up this topic after I ask them what their salary expectations are, because it's a perfect segue. Because they'll tell me I'm worth X, and then I'll say okay, so when I see your resume, I don't see any results there. So how can you command this salary if you're not even able to communicate results? They'll often tell you, oh, I can do that in an interview. And I'm saying, no, it starts here. You might not get into the interview room if you don't focus on your performance in the role. It's all very linked. Everybody wants to earn more, but nobody wants to work on their resume until they realize that they can earn more. I always tell people it's the best paid part-time job you will ever have, because in 4 to 5 hours of work, you could potentially add $5,000 to $10,000 to your starting salary in Canada. That is a little bit of a generic example, but I'm just trying to give people an idea that we all want to earn more, but not everybody wants to do the work. If I want to engage with somebody and give free consulting to them on the basis that I can place them in a role, I need them to be adaptable and open. And it's a growth kind of phase for both of us, because I love getting into the psychology. How do I motivate this person? You don't want to insult them. You don't want to tell them their resume is crap. That's not the right way to influence change. What I will tell them is, I think you could benefit from a greater focus on results and quantifiable outcomes in your resume. I'll give them some examples, resume examples that we have, or templates, and I'll also give them some ideas on how you can do it, some direct suggestions. And if they come back to that and they engage, it's great. Sometimes they don't come back, but I don't go chasing them. As in, if somebody wants to do the work, people will gravitate to you. And this is the same with networking, Dozy. It's applicable to anything in life. Everyone's time is finite. If your energy is very positive, you'll open up a lot of time. It's like people, they're networking and they say, oh, I reached out to him, he didn't get back to me. So suddenly this guy is at fault because you need his help. And I'm like, well, how many times did you try? And they're like, oh, I sent one email.
Really,
and then
can I
I'm
ask you a
like,
question?
yeah.
Are you the firstborn in your house? Sorry.
No, I'm actually the fifth.
Because you talk like a firstborn. You know how
Really?
firstborns just go like you have to do it. Like you like, because you're not, I mean, like you're actually saying hard truths. I mean, because there's an episode I released today, which is basically where the guy says, you can't keep being the victim.
Yes.
I mean, there are things that are not exactly great. Because I do think that while the newcomer has a lot to play, I also think that Canada has its part to play. There's the fact that we could benefit from a bigger economy, and there's other things we could benefit from that maybe will make job hunting much easier in Canada. But then again, is like, I think the big part of what you're saying is that you can't say, like, you don't control that. Like, what you control is, I control how my resume shows up. I control the energy I put out in the world. I control how much I go at it. I control how I network. That I control. And that I'll focus on. I think that's the big thing what you're saying. But it's a very hard listen for a lot of people. I mean, like, it's a very hard listen to, okay, why should I do this?
Yes, and like, I think the why is that moving country is probably the biggest personal growth project that you'll ever engage in. I didn't have a clue of any of these concepts when I came to Canada. I was offered a job here. I was globally relocated. I was working in finance in 2008, 6 months before the financial crisis. I had my job, my apartment, everything set for me. They put through PR papers after a year and a half. So I had everything laid out for me. But what I love is I had to grow a lot to succeed in Canada. Obviously a lot of these core basics, but I had to grow to succeed in, I wanted to push towards being sales, and I had to learn how to grow and how to sell myself. And like, I love pushing other people to succeed in these things, because the ability to sell yourself is one of the most key skills you'll ever have. And, one of the downsides, I suppose I'm getting a little bit more hard ass after 12 years of doing this, because sometimes you feel a little bit jaded at certain things. It's a difficult time to be working with immigrants right now. It's like Canada doesn't really know what they want from immigrants or how to treat immigrants. But one thing I'll always remind people is that, time is everyone's most valuable resource. And if you can come to that with energy, and it's like, I love the moment where, I'm 30 minutes into a call with a great engineer, and like, I can feel he's kind of tentative about where things are going, and he's asking, what's the opportunity, And I'm saying, whoa. There is no opportunity until we can, you look like an opportunity, frankly, right? And, it's that kind of quid pro quo where you're kind of trying to say, well, if we can spend an hour or two on your resume, we can get this right the first time. And if we can help you, deliver slightly better long-term answers, right, around how long are you going to be in Canada? The wrong answer is, well, I'm going to come here for a year or two, and if I like it, I'll stay, But people need a little bit of coaching. And what I've learned is all of the mistakes that everybody has made over the last 12 years. And what I tried to do is compile them into proactive lessons that we can work on step by step to ensure you're successful. And ultimately, that's what Moving to Canada is doing. It's trying to get people stage by stage of thinking, oh, maybe I need to do a little bit of research. Oh, maybe I need to adapt my resume. Maybe I now need to do a little bit of networking. Maybe I need to become more persistent in my communication and not just be one and done or two and done. And maybe I need to be more higher energy, because I know one of the other questions you had shared with me was like red flags. You just reminded me of another one there, as in I often meet a newcomer and they tell me this, the victim mentality. I've applied for 100 roles. I'm running out of money. I'm going to leave. They threaten to leave. And I'm like, how is this?
Wait, but that. So, like, I hear you on that. It's just, but I feel like there's always a balance, like, which is that, because it's kind of tied to something you mentioned about there's all the energy Canada is giving right now, or has been giving for a bit. And so when these things happen, when it's strong, then I feel like it's so easy for the person to also say, look, I'm just going to leave and go back to what I knew before. Like, don't you think they have the right to say that? Or you just think like, it's like you made I mean, maybe I'll answer the question myself, which is you decided to come. So like, there's no need to beat around the bush and keep self-flagellating. Maybe that I'm answering the question. What I'm like, I feel like they should at least be giving some space to kind of stew in their pity, but then act.
Yes, but you see that you but then act, right?
Yeah.
It's all okay. It's okay to be afraid. It's okay to be terrified. Like, before we were chatting, I was chatting about encouraging you as a starting entrepreneur and telling you that, like, it was 4 to 5 years of chaos for me. It was hustling. It was constant imposter syndrome, trying to get over each challenge. And like, the challenges become greater, I mentioned to you, but our ability to cope with the challenges and the stress and the creativity to resolve them, we become a lot more resilient, right?
Yeah.
So, do I really need to be told as a recruiter that you're thinking of moving home? Do you really need to threaten to leave Canada to a recruiter who's meant to be representing a future hiring manager? So, to me, it's like the language. It's an overly honest admission, but ultimately, I prefer the Romans approach, where they showed up in countries and they burnt their ship on the beach and they said, I'm here. I've just set fire to my ship. I'm here to stay. I'm going to make it stay. And that is the resilient approach. And I suppose my goal is trying to encourage that resilient and that positive outlook from people through the worst of times, But again, that is a red flag for me. If people tell me, hey, I'm just going to give up. I was on a great job back in Saudi Arabia. I don't need this shit, And I could I will try to tell them. I said, well, you should give up then. If you think you need to give up, you should. My job isn't to convince them to be resilient. What I was saying is, if you are interested in backing up your time, your investment, and the energy you've put into becoming a permanent resident in Canada, I can help you. So that's a little bit provocative, but I'm kind of learning how to press people's buttons, right? Because when they tell you I want to give up, what they're looking for is, no, don't. You should stay. You're going to be great here. I'm like, I
don't have that time. You don't have that time.
Exactly. I'm like, if you want to pay me as a consultant hourly, I'll tell you what you want to hear. But I'm working. I'm working for free here. It's not. I will try to motivate you, but I will push your buttons, and I will tell you is, if you want to give up, you should. If you want to succeed in Canada, I'm here to help. I will push you as long as you're determined to succeed and you're willing to go through the pain of saying is, my resume is not all that. Maybe I don't have the best approach to job hunting. Maybe I am not realistic about the job title I'm targeting. Maybe I'm not realistic about starting salary. Maybe I need to be more humble in terms of how I approach this equation. So, it comes back to, I know a question or a point I made previously about, are you willing to adapt to Canada, or do you expect Canada to adapt to you? And I know that's a very layered argument, because you're like, you do want to keep you as a person, but your ability to adapt will define you in Canada. There's little things. We're not asking you to change who you are as a person. We're asking you to change the tools. The documents, the approach, your attitude a little bit, maybe your ability to be more humble. We're asking you to make slight adjustments that will possibly be one of the greatest personal growth exercises you've ever gone through, because that is that's the end goal. As bad as things are in Canada right now, we have a ticking time bomb. We have so many people on temporary permits. They've been invited to come to this country to study or because of their critical skills. A lot of them are paying income tax. We now want to kick them out of the country because we invited too many people to the party. Despite all of that, Canada is hugely rewarding. If you talk to any immigrant who's been here 3 or 4 years, is they will tell you it was the best move they have ever made. There is a reason why Canada appeals to immigrants all over the world. So the question really is, are you prepared to do what it takes? Are you just going to show up? And that's, I think, the key question people need to take away. And whether it's tough love or whether they need a personalized motivator to go through it, we kind of want to get them through the other way. There are programs that people can go through. If you want to talk to somebody every day, like Nick Nurani runs the Immigrant Network, like they'll put you through a program. So find something. We're all here to help. You're here to help newcomers. I'm here to help. All the settlement agencies are here. There's so many different resources. And, I always tell people we want to help everyone, but ultimately moving to Canada is a kind of do-it-yourself help. Outpost is a concierge help for a very niche subset of construction and engineering professionals, right? But there are all different resources. There are people that will spend 2 hours with you, paid consulting, to work on your resume if you don't feel you have the skills to do it yourself. So we're all wired very, very differently. And that's what you have to appreciate with human beings, right? And it's sad when I see people ready to give up, but ultimately I want to motivate them. And I don't, like, the tough love is purely designed to kind of motivate them, says, I'll often remind them, how much time have you put into being here? Yeah. And they'll tell me it's taken 3 years to get PR. And I'm saying are you going to throw all of that away now just because you've reached an obstacle in your job hunt? Because that's all it is sometimes, It's like that analogy of the miner, and, it's don't give up.
Oh, yeah,
so close,
the one where...
so close to the gold. And, like, that's what I really want to kind of inspire people to kind of think about and say is, this is hard, but it's also very rewarding, because when you think back on it, when you have your first job, or when you have a job that is the right job for you, you kind of forget about all of that. We have very selective memories, a lot of newcomers. We forget about a lot of the pain we had to go through. And we just we analyze our life as it is now, and we go, it's a peaceful country. It's a prosperous country.
I think it's a human problem, actually. Like we forget, like we just forget the pain, which is also why we do the things we do. Like, for example, why Canada is going... We are seeing all this thing happen to politics, because we forget what it feels like when we do these kind of things. Or if you live long enough, someone said that fear and uncertainty are the best ways to remind human beings of things. Empathy doesn't really remind people of things. Empathy, like, we humans struggle to be empathetic. We say it, but we're not exactly really wired to be empathetic. It takes a lot of work for you to feel empathy. But fear, once we see what fear is, we don't forget it. But then the thing is that, as with everything, after a while, our mind just kind of, it tells us stories and masks all that, and you move away from it.
Yeah, and it's a huge project for people, and you'll forget very quickly what is the big reward. Everyone wants to have the Canadian life, and whatever that represents to you, that is the reward for all of the pain. And just to understand, there is people to bring you, help you through, and there is so many support networks giving you the advice. You just have to listen and act.
Gosh, you do give a lot of tough love. You give a lot of tough love. I want to build on. There's something you talked about on LinkedIn a couple of, I think weeks ago or months ago. And when I saw that, my first reaction was, okay. Which is when you talk about de-risking yourself as an immigrant. Okay. Yeah, because I my first reaction to that was that, I agree and I disagree in a way. So, like, okay, like, and I really want to understand when you say de-risk, like, because it also feels like there's also the part of where is the system doing the work it needs to get the immigrants going, both from employers, or is that a function of is that the government's job? And so for the employer, it's like, hey, I just want to hire you because I need talent, and I bring you onto the business to do work for me, but you just feel like you're not serious, or you're a risk, as you say, you're probably going to leave and all that. But I feel like that statement itself, de-risk yourself, like, just is also a very layered conversation, but because I feel like there are two sides to it,
Yes. Absolutely. I love this topic because it's ultimately that it's that research thing, and that's the thing is in
Mm,
when like what I love is I always think of like putting candidates, international candidates into an interview room armed with the knowledge of what's on your hiring
mm,
manager's mind. So you said it's a layered conversation because it's a two-way thing. Job hunting is a two-way task. So you
yeah.
can focus on what you're worried about, which is probably your starting salary, which again, I just think is very petty by people. But you're probably worried more about having income, right? But you have your needs, but there's also the employer needs. Okay. So it's basically doing a risk evaluation and like to treat critical risks that I always highlight to job hunters is, you have settlement risk, you know, whether you're a permanent resident or a temporary resident, there is a risk that you might not settle long term in Canada. Um, I will speak to more professional roles, right? Casual work, they're happy to have you for a few months. Professional roles, they want you for 3 to 4 years in
Yeah.
Canada. We don't really have this like freelancing or contract work kind of market. If their attitude is, if I'm going to take 6 months to train you in on how we do things in Canada, um, I don't want you to leave after 18 months, I want to make sure that you're going to be around forever. So there is a settlement risk that can be greater depending on where you're coming from. If it's a similar culture, similar weather, that settlement risk can be less than you're coming from a completely different culture. And if you're coming from extreme, if you're coming from Ethiopia to Fort McMurray, right? As in, there's a huge population there, and I'm like, I don't know how they survive there, but they make it work, right? But settlement risk really is an employer has going to put a lot of time and resources into training you, and they want to make sure is, am I going to get a return? So if you do an ace interview, you have all the skill sets, you give all the right answers and the skills, your ability to do it, the software is everything like this, and they ask you how long you're going to be around for. We touched on this earlier. If your
Yeah.
answer is, well, I've got a 2 year open work permit, or I'm on a spousal work permit because my spouse is studying, we'll see if we like it and then we might extend it. It's not the right answer. You need to tell them is, I'm here. It's okay to not be sure if you want to stay because you're just moving to a brand new country. Yes, there is a risk that you will not like it and you will not settle, but you kind of have to fool yourself a little bit to think long term if you want a long term job.
Mm,
And what happens is those people that don't think long term will end up in a short term role. They'll switch jobs after a year. They'll feel kind of unsettled in Canada because they've ultimately the opposite of a mishire as an employer done it. They've made they've basically done a misfire, and they found the wrong job the first time because they didn't work on their resume, or they didn't find the right answers, or they said, I don't know if I didn't want to be here, and they found an employer who doesn't really care about the long-term growth. So finding the right job the first time is my goal as an employer, and if they get 3 or 4 years in the right role with the right company, they're like, I'm here forever. So the opposite can happen very true. So I ask people to manage, right, settlement risk. You got to acknowledge it, but you also got to think is, here's our goal. I'm arriving on a temporary work permit, but I've researched how to stay here longer. I'm actually going to use the Canadian experience class stream of express entry because I will fit the requirements of that. That's kind of the right answer to deal with the settlement risk, right? Um, because settlement risk, and I kind of list them differently, but settlement risk really is, will you be around? But sometimes it's a, do I want to be around? And then immigration risk is a separate risk, right? Can I stay is the other one. So
yeah.
they're kind of intertwined, but also separate risks. So you got the settlement risk. Immigration risk is, can I stay? If you come in as a permanent resident, great. Okay, it looks like you're going to be able to stay. But if you're coming in on a spousal permit or a working holiday
Yeah.
visa, there's always a risk that you can't extend that. So what you need to be able to do is to de-risk that. You should have a lot of research done. Maybe ideally have met with a consultant and have a plan in place for it. Remember, Canadian employers, it's embarrassing how little they know about immigration. The typical Canadian employer still knows nothing about immigration. they are afraid of temporary work permits. And like, if they know, even though it's a 2-year work permit, they want to know what happens then, can I keep you on then after that? The other big risk, and I know this is like a can of worms, and I know you've a lot of thoughts on this as well, is local experience. There's a risk, and there's so many layers to this topic, but the risk is, will you be able to adapt how you do your work to how they would like it to be done? And yes, there's, the forward-thinking Canadian companies will ask questions like, what can you teach us? Or would you be willing to lead doing this for us? Because the reality in Canada, it doesn't matter what industry. Show me an industry in Canada that is ahead of its peers in the Western world. I would argue that many of the industries in Canada are probably behind some developing countries as well.
Yes.
So Canada is not a leader. It might be a G7 or G9 country, but it's probably the most backwards of all of them, because it's a huge landmass. Ideas don't spread very quickly here.
Yeah.
Look at the cost of traveling from one city to another and stuff like that. So they measure progress based on the US, which isn't a very good yardstick. We're still using checks. We're still, there's so many backwards things in Canada, but ultimately the local experience is you have to be willing to adapt. And what I always tell my clients, and especially in construction, is their instinct is to get you doing it their way first, but the right employer will be interested in how you've been doing it if it's better, right? So it's about a meeting of minds rather than how moldable is this guy into doing things the Canadian way. That's another one of the red flags that I highlighted for later, because it's like, if they obsess over and they make comments like, well, you don't have this, if they beat you up in the interview on how useless your global skill set is, it's probably a sign that they're not the right environment for you to grow and learn. If they obsess, it was a great comment. Like I had an Irish guy told me this before, he said, if somebody asks me too much about local experience, I run for the hills. He said, all of these industries are global. And if they're more obsessed with local than global, it's not the right fit for me as a person, And it's a bit of a hard ass comment, but he just said I'm terrified. He said, that's a red flag for me. If all they're interested in is making me do it the old way or their way, it's not the right employer. It's like a manager who doesn't want to listen to your feedback, right? So there are some of the things to look out to, but local experience is a risk that you have to manage for everyone. And like what I tell people is, tell them what they want to hear. Ask them questions like, what kind of training and skills am I going to get to understand the differences between my job in Nigeria versus what you expect from me? Do you have any other newcomers that I could speak to understand the learning curve in the industry? What are the skills that international candidates don't have that you feel are important to the role? So just be smart, acknowledge there's a gap. And, I know there's kind of like, I know you've kind of strong feelings in this. You kind of like, well, if they're backwards, well, we should show them how it's done. That's not the way forward, So
you're like, peace.
Yeah, exactly.
Why not give the employers tough love too? Like, because honestly,
oh, I do. I give them tough love as well, and I'm like, well, so you've had this role open for 6 months, and now you're not willing to train somebody just because he doesn't have a software, as in like, I highlight a lot of the obvious gaps in the mentality of employers, in hiring newcomers, but it's like a meeting of minds, right? I encourage people to be conscious that there is settlement risk, and or immigration risk in terms of your status. And then also think of local experience. And if you're armed with those, like how you can mitigate these things is I encourage people in the first minute of an interview, it's like, tell me about yourself. So you can mitigate those 3 risks in the first minute of an interview. That's how you learn and deal with things. You don't wait for them to ask. Then it becomes oh, well, they asked a question and I think I answered it okay. So they're coming into the interview with an agenda, you know? They have like, okay, great candidate, doesn't have local experience. He's on a temporary work permit. Maybe he won't be able to adapt. Your first minute of your interview can say, hi, I'm John. I have a skill set from Nigeria. I'm conscious that the insurance industry requests these specific courses and skill sets. I've researched them and I've actually arranged to sit those tests in the next couple of months because I know how critical they are to the industry. I'm arriving on a spousal work permit. My wife is studying XYZ, but our intention is to apply for PR because as a couple, we know that we would qualify under Canadian experience class. So how does that sound to the start of an interview, right? And you get rid of
it changes the game, honestly. Yes. It does.
So like, John, we talk about why do these risks involve and why should we have them doing? It's a meeting of minds. Remember, like an interview is a meeting of minds. If you can deal with their objections before they have a chance to let them linger and fester in their minds and ultimately be proactive. Because if I was an employer, I'd be amazed because I've come in with these conceptions on hiring a newcomer, whether I do it all the time or whether it's my first time. And now this person is smart enough, emotionally intelligent to kind of understand what's going on in my mind. They've applied a bit of research and they've actually kind of come out of the traps with a perfect they've perfectly overcome my 3 primary objectives. Now I can focus purely on skills, experience, and attitude. And if they meet those criteria, you're in.
The one thing I was going to ask as a follow-up on this was, and I don't know what the answer is to this, and because I've seen you talk about it a bit, is how do we balance, or how do we help employers understand the immigration system to some extent? Because my utopian side has this thing where I say, we all want Canada to grow and become better, and we all know that newcomers or immigrants play a role, part of that, if we design it well, because I do think the system needs work right now, if we design it well. But it just feels like it's all right now the immigrants and the government. And so then the government has a program brings people into the country, you supply all the things you need, and then the program just throws you into the ocean and be like, go swim, sink or die. Just find your way, And then the employers just say, hey, I have a boat, but for you to climb the boat, you have to do this. And I'm just like, couldn't there be some way in which there's some more understanding between the government and the employers, just to kind of get a sense of what happens? Now, is this a function of that we need our employers to do more work in understanding how these things work? Or is this something the government is not doing? Because you're not the first person to say this to me, where people say the employers have no idea what's going on. They just sometimes hire someone like, wait, sorry, you have a what permit? Like, sorry, I can't hire you with that because I don't understand how you can become a full-time staff. Like, any thoughts on that at all?
Lots of thoughts. So I'm just going back to like the data, right? I know in the GTA, right, is it 25% of the population of the GTA are born outside Canada, right? So they're newcomers to some degree, right? I know we classify sometimes a newcomer as within 5 years or whatever. So employers are people, okay? Sometimes they're immigrants, sometimes they're local Canadians, right? So I think what we need to do is the employer has to have the interest, first of all, right? I spend a lot of time, my best clients are, they're immigration savvy, but I work in the construction sector. It's full of dinosaurs, right? People ask me, I was at a conference there last week and he goes, oh, have you ever talked to these people? And I'm like, they're not my people. They're not a target client. I know that, I see the lack of diversity and I see the attitudes and I'm like, these are not my people. Not everybody can be your client and not everyone is a potential employer for you. So that's why I always talk about the research phase. You got to realize is not every company in your target industry is perfect for you. That's why culture is so important, right? Newcomers, hire newcomers. They're the best advocates, right? A lot of my best clients are the hiring managers are newcomers themselves. And that's why I always say is when you're networking, it's your own diaspora is the first network that you need to tap into, because Nigerians hire Nigerians, Indians hire Indians. It's a fact. They see in you what they were themselves when they came here. And if you can come to them and you can give off positive energy, and you can have the right job search tools and have the right attitude and the persistence, they will say, this is me 5 years ago. I need to hire this person. That's the beautiful thing I see, because in Canada, I see is we kind of have two types of newcomers, sadly. Okay, we have ones coming from Western countries, and we have ones coming from developing countries. And I see that a lot even with recruitment, because sometimes it's because there's increased settlement risk when you're coming from a developing country, because culturally it can be very, very different. But the design standards can be different, the construction standards, the health and safety standards. So it's not like you can often point to, is this racism or is this systemic racism? But ultimately it's like, as I see as a recruiter, that people are looking for the perfect fit. And if there isn't a higher element of settlement risk, they might say as well, we would hire an engineer from India or Iran directly, but we don't really want to pay a fee on that type of candidate. So how I help those candidates is I help them, give them the exact same help, and I give them the HR contacts of my clients. So I'm very motivated to help people and overcome challenges. But to me, it's just part of the business in recruitment that it has to be an 8, 9, or 10, and not a 7 with potential, And sometimes if they're if your experience isn't directly transferable, there's a challenge that you have to overcome, and that's how you overcome that. Might be stepping down a role, or finding out the courses that are different between Iran and India and Canada or something, or maybe understanding, maybe having worked, doing a transition course, or taking on, a LinkedIn course and stuff like that. So, there are, I'm sorry, I'm going back to the original question here. I'm like, I went off on a tangent. We're going to have to delete that. Where the original question was?
Yeah, it was around basically, how do you even help employers? And I think you did talk a bit about that.
Yeah. So I just went off on a tangent,
and that's okay. I love the tangent actually, because I think that's actually helpful. Because you're talking about the other side of it. But I think again, back to like you're saying about the original question is like, how do we help the employers?
So like... I knew there was another part. I just went too far down that vortex, right? So how do we help employers? First of all, they have to have the need to help themselves, but we can, if I am a newcomer and I'm working and I realize that my HR manager seems ignorant of immigration, send them an article on Moving to Canada, or send them the IRCC content on this. And better still, as in, that might still be a challenge for them. That might be the block. Maybe they just don't understand some of the simple concepts. So take time. I always encourage a newcomer, you have to be your own immigration expert, because you have to be able to account for the deficit. And if there is no deficit, it pays to be your own immigration expert, because you don't need to pay a lawyer. You don't have to pay a consultant for every challenge you have. We're trying to make immigration easier and democratized at Moving to Canada. So how do we fill the gap? We can't, those that don't want to learn will never learn. But I think we can realize that there is a lot of things that we can control. Ultimately, it's making people aware of what's going on. We did think about having an employers section in Moving to Canada, but ultimately it's the same as a candidate. What an employer needs to do is exactly what a candidate needs to do, except a slightly different wording, right? But I do lament the lack of knowledge in Canada. For a country, we probably have, it's probably around 15% newcomers right now, if you kind of go back 5 to 10 years. We're a little bit ignorant of the solution to our labor shortage. And I think there needs to be a meeting of minds. I think IRCC should do a better job in terms of running workshops for employers. Perhaps the settlement agencies, which are funded by IRCC, can do a better job of educating employers. But also, I would encourage the newcomer to try and meet them halfway and have enthusiasm and knowledge that you can kind of share and say, I understand I'm a temporary foreign worker and there's a certain stigma associated with that now, but my temporary foreign or my current work permit expires in December 2027, and this is my plan for overcoming it. It's actually quite easy. It requires that I'm employed for 1 year, which is both of our goals. It requires you guys to present evidence of that when I get to the document stage, and then maybe highlighting that there might be PNP routes as a backup plan. So that's not very difficult, but that's something we do for all newcomers, helping them arrive prepared to fly the flag for their own immigration if their employer doesn't. So to me, I think, one of the positives of out of this today is maybe making people aware. I don't think a lot of people are aware that employers are. I would argue the typical employer is completely ignorant on immigration knowledge. They use the term temporary foreign worker with a kind of almost an element of stigma. Where I would prefer if they talked about global talent and they talked about you're the solution to our skills gap. How do we help you stay longer? So that's the kind of meeting of minds that I would love to see in an interview. And frankly, they're the clients I deal with, because you can go find your people, as in not necessarily newcomers, but people that want to hire newcomers, or you can swim up current and convince a company that has never hired somebody on a temporary foreign work permit to hire, So that's a big part of the research stage. And I guess that might kind of go is how do the companies I want to work for rate in terms of culture and diversity? And that might be a signal to you. You should be able to maybe identify do these guys hire temporary foreign workers, or do they hire? How important is local experience to them? Do they beat me around the head about my lack of local experience, or do they see it as an opportunity for them to modernize and grow? So there's a lot of kind of cues in there in both elements, but ultimately things that every newcomer can control, they can learn and they can act on,
It's so layered, and it's so hard, because there's the part of, I think the big thing there is, do you want to be a victim, or do you want to say, what do I control? You can talk about racism all you want, it does exist. Okay, fine, that's good. Okay, now, so what do I do? That kind of thing. I think about this in a lot, where someone says, if I understood what they understood, I'll probably do what they did. So maybe that's my way of trying to feel empathy for the other person, because I don't understand what you understand, or I don't know what you know, so I can't do what you're doing. But if I knew what you knew, I'll probably behave that way, and maybe that gives me some mental space to say, okay, now that I understand this is why you're behaving, I understand why you're behaving like this. What can I do within myself to help? And two, if they refuse, can I just go find my people? Which is that thing you say about, do the research and find your people. Go find your people, because not everyone is going to like you. I think that's the same with getting hired too. It's some folks are going to see you and be like, I don't want someone from that part of the world. And we can talk about whether the morality of that conversation, and we can fight that. But if you're trying to pay your bills, it's okay, you want to just go quickly find someone to get you hired, and then come back and fight that battle.
Yep. And the cool thing there is your people will tell it to you as it is. And I'm not telling you that, if you're Nigerian, you have to go work for Nigerians, but start with networking and find somebody who's been through what you're about to embark on, and tell it to me as it is. That's probably the best advice I can give to newcomers is seek improvements, not compliments, and that kind of goes back to, I know you, probably corrected, pointed out correctly. I kind of am into the tough love mentality. I got a lot of tough love from my parents. I didn't get a lot of compliments, I'll tell you that. But I'm very grateful. I had an amazing upbringing. And you know what? I feel like it made me resilient, because you can come to this country. I always say is we got to understand the balance between confidence and arrogance, right? And it's good to be confident that you're going to do well, but overconfidence is arrogance, and that's a negative trait. So what we want to do is, arrive in Canada confident that you have the skills to prepare, but also being aware that there's more gaps. And a simple approach of telling somebody when you meet them for an informational interview, you have a coffee or a virtual chat with somebody, or you're sending your resume to somebody in your diaspora, is say, look, I do this with my team, and it's amazing what results I get. Is I say, look, don't seek out compliments. Compliments should be given, but don't seek them out. Look for improvements, that critical assessment. And it's people that want to grow, of course, will benefit from fostering their strengths and some compliments, but people that want to grow will look for improvements. And that's again a different mindset. But I always encourage people, seek out improvements, and tell people, look, be as blunt as you like with me, because I want to make this the best possible resume. This is the foundation of my success. This is how I'm going to feed my family in Canada, and this is my lucky ticket. So don't hold back. And it's amazing if you say that,
the stuff you get back.
Yeah.
I think I have two more questions. I think which is, the first one is like, you've talked a bit about it, which is part of the energy. But like, if you were talking to a newcomer, let's remove the tough love hat a bit now, please. What are the biggest red flags? Without the tough love, Ruairi. Without the tough love, please.
That's a tough question.
Yeah, I know.
Okay, so I suppose the thing, what are the red flags for me when I'm dealing with a newcomer? I'm going to give you some of the lines, and I'll explain, or as you said, what makes you think this person is going to struggle, right?
Yeah.
The first one is, my resume is fine the way it is. That's like, again, you're just telling me that you're not willing to adapt your approach. Again, maybe that's commendable confidence, but ultimately, if I've seen improvements to their resume and they're not willing to improve it, that to me is a little bit of a red flag, because again, this is probably the tough love, but if they're not willing to adapt their resume, maybe it's a clue that when they're in a new role, that they're not going to be open to doing things a new way. So you got to think, and you can accuse me of exaggerating something there, that a resume is just a job tool and their ability to perform a job requires adaptability. But sometimes you can read into these things a lot, right? If somebody if they're missing critical information, they say, I'm not willing to change this. That to me is a kind of, I'll politely step away. I won't tell them this is why I'm stepping away, but I'll be like, oh, maybe I don't have anything suitable for you. Maybe you should try these companies. I have seen over time, I'll give you quantifiable proof on this, the people that don't want to adapt their resume or aren't open to doing these things and kind of go, I don't need a recruiter, I don't need advice from anyone. Those are the people that will come in and they're gone within 2 years. I've been doing this for 12 years. I see what happens. Remember, the goal is to find the right long-term role the first time. Job hunting, if you got to do it repeatedly because you're choosing the wrong jobs or you're at too low a level to get the right job you want in terms of your approach and your resume and your skill set, you're just going to find shitty jobs with shitty hiring managers. And then you're going to feel burnt after 2 years in Canada. You're going like, this Canadian dream is a nightmare. My salary isn't growing. I'm on 2 different jobs already. Now people are accusing me of being a job, I'm jumping around in my salary. So this is why we start with the preparation and the research, right? So that's one of the key kind of flags. My resume is fine the way it is, or I don't want to do that, or it's fine to present resumes or projects in US dollar. I'm not changing it. I'm like, why would you present like, how relevant is the US dollar to Canada? I know it's our neighbor, but right now it's elbows up. So you got to realize that your ability to adapt is the same terminology, right? The other comment with the resume is, I paid someone to edit my resume, so I'm not changing it again. And I'm like, Okay. Did you pay the right person to edit your resume? If it's not good enough, it's not good enough, right? I've had that frank conversation with a lot of candidates. I'm saying, this is great, but somebody you paid in New Zealand to edit your resume before you move to Canada has no clue what employers are looking for in Canada. I'm working in this market for 12 years, and I'm not telling you it's my way or the highway, but I'm giving you advice. And if you kind of think that a professional that you know in Canada knows better than I do, then like it's okay, but it's not really flattering, right? We're looking for that malleability and that adaptability. So often it's a meeting of minds, right? I don't expect people to do everything I say, but it's trying to follow the kind of principles, right? Another red flag, and I touched on it earlier, is I'm earning X in Saudi Arabia and this is my expectation in Canada. And I'm like,
well, that should be allowed, right?
Yeah.
But that should be allowed in some way. And shouldn't you be able to say to yourself that I was X before, and maybe I don't get that?
It's a factor. It's a factor, but it's not a right that you have. Just because you're overpaid to work in the desert doesn't mean that a Canadian employer needs to match your salary, right? You know, as in, like, that's been my experience in construction, right? There's a certain type of profile that wants to go and work, you know, on work on a camp working in the desert. It's not about work-life balance. It's about earning more money, right?
Yeah.
And if they're now coming back and realizing that I don't have the work-life balance, my family can't play on the streets, or we're on if they're coming back to seek all of those things, it's not Canada's job to match what you're earning. It's just something that you have to take into, because frankly, right now, a lot of candidates in construction in particular, if you're coming from Dubai or the Middle East or Australia or the US, I kind of have to explain to them that you probably need to take a salary cut, but you're in control of how much your salary is cut, because you control your resume, you control your approach, you control the questions you ask. So it's just, to me, as saying this is my hard number, I'm like, that's a red flag for me, because it just shows that they just don't get how the world works, right? Does a Big Mac need to be the same price in every country? So you asked me to try not be hard ass, right?
I think I've given up. I think you're just wired that way, and which is fine, which is fair, but you're just wired that way. I think building on that is So
I have one more for you, actually. Is I'm willing to do anything. I think I touched on that as well. Is that doesn't really help people help you. It can put you on the right track for a survival job, but just think about what you want to do in Canada, right? As in, most people don't come here to work in a survival job for 5 years, you know?
Yeah.
So I'm willing to do anything is kind of like, okay, I'm not willing to do the research and I want you to match me with a job. So that's where the research and preparation comes in. Like, it's kind of your job to figure out what are the 2 job titles that I could do. So that is a little bit of a red flag, and that might seem a little bit harsh, but I mean it in context to professional employment, because you're not able to do anything. This is the other thing is like, our Canadian system, I was going to say rightly or wrongly, but I think it's completely wrong that it's academically biased. These are not the skills, age and academic bias are not the skills. They seem like a good basis, but we're 10 years into express entry now, and how are we actually doing, So age and academic qualifications like master's and PhD and degree are not good indicators of success. But what happens is I find a lot of candidates, because they have these academic conversations, they actually believe they can do anything, So that's the other reality, They actually think I have a master's, I can do anything. You've gone through a very focused thing that shows your ability to learn, but a lot of our academic qualifications just show your ability to rote learn content and apply yourself at certain things. It does not give you license to do anything you want in Canada, or be qualified for any kind of job. So there's a certain, the one thing I do notice is the more academic a candidate is, the more stubborn they often are, you know? So that's something to think about is your academic knowledge making you think you have the answers for every question? Because give me somebody with a diploma in construction and a good attitude any day versus a person with a master's degree, because the master's degree, they have a certain element of entitlement because they have studied a higher level. So I'm just asking them to balance their expectations a little bit, because it's just a basis for life. You know, on the job learning is something that our immigration system does not take into account. We don't take entrepreneurship into account. You know, it's all this academic focus. We don't take trade qualifications into account, or we set up a program and it's empty. You know, it's gathering cobwebs. So Canada has made a lot of mistakes, and I just always remind people that your academic knowledge is just a core, just one factor in you developing as a person and succeeding in Canada, right?
Yeah, I think the thing is that it's almost like this leading versus lagging indicator conversation, where people are like, your academics are just like they're lagging indicators. They kind of tell us who you were before, you know. But the thing with the immigration system itself is that just because of the way it's designed, we can also use the academics to predict the future. Or if you did a master's, then we can predict X. I think the thing is, what we're struggling with right now is, how do we account for the other parts? And those other parts are they're messy, they're hard to measure, you know. So it's like, how do you account for attitude? How do you account for adaptability to the culture, to the code, to the way Canada does things? It's all messy and hard to adapt. So we just pick the easy one. Oh, if I see you have a master's, so okay, so it means that you can X. But then the Cobra effect happens, because if you now say to people, oh, show me that you have a master's, and everyone starts to kind of design themselves around those incentives, because they want to show that's how they get into the country. And it's hard. So I feel like I do think that the system is good in its way, but I think that where we failed massively, and I think I wrote about this some days ago, is that what we've just done is bring people in. Then the thing that happens after, the governor just ignored it. Like, they've literally ignored it. And then we've taken that same checkbox that was used to bring you in to run the system internally. I'm like, no, there are two different systems. There's a system for bringing you in, is, do you match certain things? Can I predict who you will become? Now you're in the country, is a different conversation entirely. And it just feels like that has been left to just fester, and we've just ended up with this mess that we're in right now, which is now becoming a cultural problem, and there's still the survival problem. It can get messy, and people will send me emails and say, you shouldn't have to say that, so I'll just keep quiet now.
No, there's so many layers to that, Dozy. Like, I always, like, it's very easy to criticize, right? And I guess I will, but I'll also kind of go as, you know, the merit of the express entry system is great, but perhaps it needs to take into, you know, my colleague Rebecca wrote about, you know, the fact that it ignores, you know, trades, entrepreneurship, on-the-job training, freelancers. You know, all four of these skills are critical to a booming economy, but we just focused on the academia. You know, in Ottawa, they sat down, and you know what? Most of these policymakers are academic outputs, and they kind of goes, well, this is, you know, they see what they want to see, and they say, well, if we give them all masters and PhDs, they're guaranteed to succeed in Canada. But then we have the bureaucracy of foreign credentials assessment. We have the bureaucracy of employers being afraid to hire international experience. We have the bureaucracy of, you know, sending candidates packing right now after they've come in on a segue to PR. And like, I dealt with an instance the other day, a guy who's been here for 8 years. He came in as a student. Then he got a 3-year postgrad work permit. He actually has 4 years of experience because he had a bridging visa or something. But he's actually been filling a critical skills gap for 4 years in this country. and he's going home now. He's got to go home. And I'm like, we're not doing the simple things right, and we're not retaining the talent that is. Just because you pay income tax and you came to Canada on a program doesn't entitle you to stay here forever. But if you pay income tax, you come here to solve a critical skills gap. Why are we not keeping those people in the country? Every one of them that leaves is going to open up a new role that we don't have a newcomer to fill right now because we're not bringing new people in. So it's a ticking
messy.
time bomb is how I describe it.
It's messy. It's messy, and it's just, I think for me the sad part is like we're not having the right conversations. Instead, we're now caught up in no TFW or TFW. I'm like, that is not the conversation. Like, that is not the conversation to have. Like, the question is, what is the system? How do we, like, what are we trying to do?
I touched on it at the start. I said Canada doesn't know what it wants. Why would you identify critical skills that you want? You set up a program to bring them in, and then you sabotage them from succeeding in the country. Because that's actually what we're doing we're looking at the solution of our labor shortage, and we're allowing Canadian society to almost blame them for our social problems instead of putting our arms around them and saying, thank you for filling a critical skills gap, And the silence from the government is deafening right now, because they're sitting back and they're allowing immigrants to be blamed for all of the problems in Canadian society, our housing affordability. The TFW discussion is we're allowing Canadians to believe that it's being abused, that all TFWs are being abused and it's all rogue players. And ending that program is solving a system that's being abused by rogue players and immigrants. And I'm like, that's not what it is. There's some, the doctors and nurses that serve people during COVID are TFWs, or temporary foreign workers. And it's like, we seem to have no compassion, but we have a history of scapegoating immigrants for all of our social problems in Canada, right? And it's a long history.
Yeah, so it is a long one.
It's sad. It's really, really sad that. Look, what I've set out to do at Moving to Canada is we're trying to make people more aware, because I actually sat on an entrepreneurship roundtable yesterday, and what they urged me is they're all Canadians, okay, but they looked at me and they said, I met one of my neighbors. He's going through the same thing. I had no idea until you told me, until you rang the bell, that we are treating our fellow human beings like this. So I think what we can all do, all of the people working with newcomers, I think we all need to come together and we need to make people aware, because temporary foreign workers don't have a vote. Politicians don't care about these people. We've got to make politicians care about these people. And how we do is making established newcomers who are now citizens and the typical Canadian, making them aware that this is how we're actually treating people. And they're falling through the cracks because they don't have a vote. There's no political will to help newcomers. We did see a few cases in the last few days of a few temporary foreign workers who went to media and they're getting pardons. And you know what? That's IRCC jumping on the PR bandwagon. They're going, oh, perfect. An opportunity to say, oh, that was one crack in our system, And they're trying to solve these and I think it's lousy that they're doing that. They should fix the system instead of making exceptions. And I think I encourage everyone who works with newcomers right now, because I'm very fed up, and I think you're fed up, and we're all fed up.
Honestly, like it's.
But here's the thing, right? We can complain or we can act. And I think that's the chance for us all to act and say is, if we make Canadian citizens aware of what's going on and how their immigration system has set people up to fail, and how IRCC are taking zero accountability for setting up a program that brought too many people to the party, and now they're kicking everyone out of the party, even the good actors,
Yeah.
So I think we owe it to ourselves to make everyone aware of this. And if we create awareness and nobody acts, then so be it. But right now, we can't just complain.
Done the work. Yeah, we've done the work.
So it's like the job hunt, right? All I say is action counts for something, right? And what we can do is we look at the problem, We'll take action. We'll follow our own hard-nosed advice, and we'll act on it. Tough love works.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Ruairi. Thank you. Gosh. Like, when I was starting this episode, I was like, okay, this is probably be a 30-minute conversation. We'll spend an hour, 30 minutes chatting. Like, thank you so much. Like, thanks for coming on the pod, honestly. Like, thank you so much.
That's good. My pleasure. It was really good to chat and just hear your perspectives on a lot of these issues as well, right?
Yeah, thanks so much. That was some tough love. Yeah. Ruairi doesn't hold back. But I think sometimes as an immigrant, you need to kind of hear the truth. But yeah, I think you should probably just go back and listen to it again. But if not, thank you for getting to this point. If you know someone who finds this useful, because I think this is a really good episode, please send to them. If you know someone I should talk to who can give us some more tough love like Ruairi, please send them my way. As always, like, share, subscribe on Substack, with YouTube, and anywhere you get your podcast, because you can find us there. Peace out.